Hi there. Welcome to Broadcast Interrupted. I'm Chirag and with me is Andy. Hi, Andy.
Hello.
On this week's episode, we have with us Rohan Shivkumar. He is an architect, academician, and filmmaker. I have known Rohan for over a decade now, primarily because he was my teacher at the Kamla Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture, where I studied.
Right.
You, on the other hand, have not really had a conversation with him before this. How was the experience?
Oh, it was great. I haven't spoken to him before, but I've definitely known about him during my own studies in Mumbai. And he was always present in the architecture community at different events and public meetings.
Okay.
And I also remember him as being associated with a lot of research in urban design with the Urban Design Research Institute.
The UDRI?
Yeah. And also with some art collectives, actually.
Majlis. I think they did the Cinema City project.
Right.
Yep.
And he brings these things up during the conversation and sort of elaborates on them. And I love that, especially something that's not very common for for architects to do, which is film.
Yeah.
And his collaborations with Avijit Mukul Kishore on
Nostalgia for the Future and Lovely Villa.
Absolutely.
Both, really amazing documentaries. Yeah, I think it's great. I also think that part of what he discussed when it came to his experience as an educator in the field of architecture, the documentation projects that he does at Kamla Raheja, of which I was a part of when I was a student too.
Yeah, you've told me about them.
We had to do a documentation project in Assam, and it was just amazing, this entire experience of taking a bunch of students from Mumbai and placing them in a remote location in Assam, and what was the confrontation like.
The stories were absolutely hilarious to me for somebody that wasn't there physically, but yeah. A great guy, very, very funny personality, and very insightful. I think he has a very, very broad range of curiosities that he very poignantly talks about during the course of the conversation that we had.
Absolutely. So I'm not going to let our viewers and listeners
wait any longer.
Let's just jump right into it. And yeah, all the relevant links relating to Rohan Shivkumar's work will be put in the description. So have a look and thank you.
Rohan Shivkumar, thank you so much for doing this. We've been lightly associated, at least myself, as somebody that's known you as an architect and a thinker and a filmmaker for, I think, a good over a decade now. And we've known you as an architect from the Mumbai scene, cultural scene, and in the academic world, where you were often at my school also for juries, and they were really exciting times. But I think the first thing I want to ask is, looking at some of your interviews and some of the things you've said, we are convinced that you're absolutely in love with architecture, and that's something where we connect with you. It's a very simple thing, but we all know it's quite a love-hate, painful, fun thing to do. Looking back at your trajectory, what's your sense of how things have fallen into a kind of rational idea of an architect for yourself? I mean, have you, when you look at your trajectory and where you stand at the moment as an actor, as a cultural actor and an architect, and in all those roles that you try to play in society, what do you think? What's your sense of how it has gone, or do you have sort of moments that stand out, or sort of moments that are stretched?
You're asking for my personal history in terms of
yes.
how I got to where I am today, whatever that might be.
And what does it feel like today?
Yeah.
How do you see the history?
I I find myself right now very happy with the fact that I've decided to engage wholeheartedly with the creation of ideas as a practice of an architect. I mean, that's what I like to imagine my practice as, whether that's through the making of courses, designing courses, writing things, or making films. I enjoy the world of ideas, and it took me some time to get here. I must admit. I went to a school of architecture, both the schools of architecture. I went to both my bachelor's course, which was the LSR School of Architecture in Bombay, and my master's course, which was at the University of Maryland, at in the United States. Both of those schools were very clearly aimed towards creating sort of practitioners. That's what their primary focus was.
Right.
The world of ideas, if any, were usually around, but they were largely in the service of the making of a practitioner. And the practice also was imagined, especially in LSR, as a very particular kind of practice that is plugged very clearly into the modes of building production that are at play in the world today, in the city today. Which is what LSR was about. And and it wasn't. I mean, I don't think I was very aware of the point that that was not my world. When I passed out of school, I had just presumed that that is the only way that an architect works, because frankly, there were no other horizons that were shown to me. In other words, I went to the United States to do my masters, and I don't know. I thought like urban design would be good because I was interested in cities. Somehow, I guess there was a sort of disenchantment with the object per se. I would say that for certain. I just felt like I wanted to do something important, like
Okay.
something.
Right.
That's all.
It's a
Ambition,
teleological urge. Purpose.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an ideological urge. It was just
नहीं
an
नहीं
instinct.
टीलियो नहीं इडियो नहीं टीलियो पर्पस टाइप
So,
का
yeah, perhaps, right?
हाँ, yeah.
So I went to the US. I did my master's at the University of Maryland. I enjoyed myself thoroughly. And after that, again, I had a decision to make whether I would come back to India or whether I would continue to find work in America.
Right.
And I think the same thing happened with me at that point. I had to, and that decision was actually simple because I felt like, what I did actually is that before I came back to India, I decided that I have to make a decision, right? So I decided to take a long train ride all over America to just get a sense of the landscape.
okay.
Ah, all right.
I got inside a train, and you have these amazing US rail passes that they used to have that allow you unlimited travel across an entire month.
Okay.
So I basically, I don't know what you call them, couch surfed. That's it.
Yeah.
Couch surfed my way across from the east coast to the west coast, up and down and back.
Okay.
And I got back, and that evening I booked my ticket back to India because I felt like somehow, and I guess it's a sort of the naivety of youth. I guess you could call it that. I
Or
felt
the
at that point,
fearlessness.
maybe fearlessness, or I don't know. I wouldn't call it fearlessness
Okay.
actually, because I don't think I was particularly courageous. That's it. I think I was just. I think largely worked with instinct at that point. It was just
Right.
something that I felt like my existence in the United States would be severely circumscribed by the mode of productions of buildings there, and it didn't seem like the kind of practices that I would end up working with in the United States would be something that I would enjoy doing.
Okay.
I felt like, in some senses, it's a little pompous to say that, but I'm going to say it anyway. Is that I felt
Please.
like I can actually perhaps be of more use, if that is the word.
Yeah.
Back in India. That's what I said, naivety, right? And pomposity too, arrogance perhaps. And so I came back to India. But even at that point, you have to understand that my training has been largely in the world of making buildings. So I came back, and although I had done a teaching stint at the University of Maryland, I never thought of myself as a teacher at that point. I still thought I'll come back and set up a practice,
Right.
urban design, stuff like that. I came back, and immediately, literally the first month, a friend of ours asked whether you'd like to teach at Kamla Raheja. I said, might as well, because I used to enjoy it. So I went and I started teaching there. And
What year was this?
This was 1997.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And I think that's I think 91 or 92 is when Kamla Raheja starts.
1992. So it
92,
was
yes. Yeah.
we were between directors. Sen Kapadia had just left,
Okay.
and Trilochan Chaya was, I think, about to become director the next year. So I was hired
Okay.
literally in the gap. My interview was the most ridiculous interview anyone has ever had, because I went, and I don't know whether you know Subodh Dhairyavan, an amazing architect, like
Okay.
Yeah.
completely off. I mean, incredible man. And he looks at me and says, Kai, tu Sonal's oh, you're Sonal's brother, no? I
Uh-huh.
said, yeah, Sonal is my sister. She studied at KRVIA at that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he said, you're, so I said, yes, sir. I am, sir. I was very humble. See. And then he says, okay, Raza, second year, Raza. I mean, go to the second year and teach. So I go upstairs, and there is a strange project that is going on. Like, it's really strange for me.
Okay.
We've always had side programs, but make bubble diagrams, make plans, that kind of building. And I go there, and there's some strange project that's going on that concerns people going to Ujjain, coming back, making a model of an Ujjain, and which is not the Ujjain, but has characteristics of Ujjain. I'm wondering, why would anyone do that? And in that artificial Ujjain, they are taking out a building, and they're inserting a fakir's kind of place to live. I was like, what the world is going on? I just did not understand, because there was no logic there, and there was
Uh-huh.
no.
Yeah.
It didn't even vaguely resemble what I was taught earlier.
Yeah.
That was quite a and of course I must have embarrassed myself like hell, because I wanted to be part. It's a very intellectual school. Everyone's
Yeah.
very and I was no training.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
I go there, and I'm like, everyone is, kind of dropping names here and there, saying things like, Mies is something and a something. I'm like, okay, I finished my master's. I have no idea of half the references that they have. So I'm also trying desperately to participate in the conversation.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I make an ass of myself, because I'm dropping names when I have no idea about anything. And of course, I'm not, as I should have been. At which point I was like, okay, I, I think that's the only thing that I learned across LSR and the Maryland
Maryland.
thing,
Yeah.
is that I think I became what they call an autodidact. Like, like you're like, Acha, so if they don't know, I'll also know now. And then you kind of,
Huh.
it's not that difficult, for
Yeah.
God's sake.
Yeah.
Dikha dunga.
I think that really helped. And I think that is when my actual kind of interest, I realized actually
Yeah.
that the world of academia is also, it offers so much.
Mm-hmm.
Offers so much just in terms of the way that one can participate within thinking about architecture. Also, the fact that you're dealing with so many young men and women who
Mm-hmm.
also come to school with I think the most important ingredient to be an architect, which is hope.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I felt like that was a very nice space to be part of. I also felt that that was a good place to really think about crisis, about architecture, and think about what architecture can be or what it should be, what are the things it should be doing, and of course, theory helps you do that.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's
Is
a? Oh yeah,
yeah,
sure. Please.
yeah. What do we say?
I just wanted to clarify maybe that do you think it could be termed as a kind of a deprivation within a discipline that somehow produces this hope that you mentioned, and then the turn towards theory and history because
No, you're saying, oh no, I mean, architecture itself is, I think, one of the most, if you ask me,
sure.
perhaps the most optimistic of all the disciplines that I know of is architecture, because it has no other choice.
Yeah.
When you design something, you're designing for somebody's idealized imaginations.
Right.
You're never designing for the person, who the person is. You're always designing for whom the person wants to be.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Architecture always, in many ways, becomes a sort of costume that they can wear to perform their identities.
Mm.
When a person is choosing to perform an identity, they are always choosing to perform a certain idealization of their aspirations. So I think optimism and hope, that it's a hope that the costume of architecture will actually be able to transform your own identity.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why I think architecture is like is the most important ingredient for me as far as architecture is concerned is the belief that you can make a difference.
Yeah.
Even if the difference is, a tiny little one, that the light fitting in this room is going to make everything so exotically spectacular. Even
Or
that,
would you also say that the difference that it makes need not be microanalyzed or understood, but as understood more as a slow burning sort of quest of a community of people?
it could be, but I do think though that because architecture has because there's so much money involved in it, actually,
Absolutely.
that very often these quests are articulated in some form.
Right.
There is some sort of articulation that it takes. Those articulations might not necessarily be very legible, or they may even be subterranean in everything is saying, everyone is saying, and may need some excavation. But I do think that there is definitely somewhere, if we look at the way that architecture and architects also frame their own voices, frame their own desires, one will recognize that there is a perpetual, or in the good architects, actually, if you ask me, there's a perpetual framing of their work within an idealization of who we want to become.
Right.
Okay.
And I think it's nice to think about it that way. It's nice because, especially as a teacher, I think that's an important thing for me, is to constantly recognize that it is about becoming. We are always in the processes of becoming, and the 5 years of architecture are, I guess, ways in which we become.
Yeah.
Or at least that it triggers that becoming to a real thing that one can be conscious of, and then
But
continue.
rather, it gives you frameworks through which you can constantly become,
Right.
Yeah.
where you
Great.
don't stay still, where
Yeah.
you are constantly, in many ways, allowing yourself to transform.
And I think within that, this kind of idea of that to kya hua that you just said, like that attitude really helps kind of understand this notion of becoming. Like every time you confront something and you say to yourself, "ठीक है, तो क्या हुआ? I don't know this," or maybe there is something a little far away which I want to approach or get to, and that attitude I think kind of really helps in this.
Look, I think it's for me, one of the most important images that I feel is the mirror. I mean, just an idea. It's the
Right.
mirror.
Okay.
And whenever I think about the idea of the mirror, is that you are standing in front of it, and you're looking at yourself, and you're very rarely completely satisfied with what you're seeing in the mirror.
Yeah.
On the other side of the mirror is something you want to become, and you're on this side. You're constantly adjusting yourself to become that person.
Yeah.
But as soon as you change this, that also changes, no?
Yeah.
So there is a perpetual sort of movement towards that image in the mirror, which itself is an apparition.
Right.
That is of your own mind. So I think that for me that becomes an important imagination to know that to know first of all that stillness or stillness uh, or a space without desire. Okay, a space that many people love. There's always this imagination that a space without desire is the idealized sort of place to be. You give up everything and go into nature.
Kind of an absolute.
Yes, and for me that is always in many ways death.
Okay. Okay.
It is actually the place where everything ends, nothing begins.
Okay.
I think there is in the mirror there is always this sort of possibilities of who one can be, and you can always keep performing in the mirror. You can always choose an image of who you want to be, so you don't necessarily stay still. On the other side of the mirror is who you want to become. I mean, whatever that person is, but that need not be one person. It could be many different people too.
Yeah, those figures are always sort of shifting and blurring out, focused, out of focus.
Destabilizing dizzy currents in the half light of the computer screen, changing. I watch him rise again and again in a trance, in the summer like weather. Being here again and again, endlessly. Rewind, rewind, rewind. Memories of the throbbing drum machine, a last cuff, a shrug. Anything else that we could have done?
Have fun.
Goodbye.
The primitive hut, uninhabited, desolate on the empty street. Women in darkened rooms remember the laughter of children and old men wearing white, shielded from death by the watching eternal eye.
On the swing, the three of us sit and lie through our teeth for a promise he made to himself and made us keep. His name was sacrifice, hers is truth. She is him, I am her. On the edge of this memory lies an island of hope. Oceans rise and fall. The grass sways as we make like stars on the screen of the night sky. Constellations mirror our limbs. We dance, our bodies positioned still, but freer than ever.
Might it have been better to force his hand, to make him rather than let him? To be able to say no or yes, swaying this way and that, we remember
Being there forever, waiting in the rain, the tarpaulin dripping impatience, waiting forever.
Talking about, we've obviously touched a lot of bases already with sort of, let's say, hashtags already that I love. But I think I want to bring some attention to who are you talking to? Where can you locate where the discussions about architecture and films and these things are happening around you? It could be a cafe, it could be a classroom, it could be a studio, it could be a living room, but not in terms of architectural program or an address, but who's talking about these ideas, and who are you talking to?
I see myself as a teacher, right? I mean, that's
Right.
the way I see my own practice. And I see teaching itself as a practice. And when I think about teaching, I think about not necessarily. So I love the academic space as a space for conversations that can take place. Because I think and I do think that often the idea of a professional school is slave to the imagination that we are training only a professional, or rather we are training somebody for the profession which is imagined in a very particular way. So there is a sort of almost I don't know what's the word, I can't get the exact word, but a sort of utilitarian imagination of the academic space.
Right.
Not necessarily the academic space as a space for rethinking and challenging the presumptions that are very often deeply embedded within architecture and architectural practice, or whether very simply even within ideas of beauty, efficiency, and all of the
Aesthetics.
other.
And
Yeah, the stuff that we very often take for granted. Well, I think that the academic space has the potential to really do that, and I think it's through the doing of that a student is allowed to become,
Right.
choose where this goes. So I genuinely believe that the academic space is a really important space, and of course, I'm very lucky to be in the city of Bombay, where because the city itself is a bunch of extraordinary kinds of energies that are in the air. As a city, it has never been seen as a really intellectual city. It's always seen as produce karte. It's deeply embedded in the market. It's deeply embedded in commercial cinema, in the fashion industry,
between
advertising.
vanity and sort of deprivation, it sort of
Yeah, it's a place that is seen as corrupt.
debauchery.
Yeah.
And not a place for deep thinking about things. It doesn't retreat itself into a university space where intellectuals give seminars, and there's that world, right? It's a very beautiful world. I'm not dissing it, but I do find that kind of world, which is sort of the academia world,
Yeah.
with its own sorts of languages and its own kinds of rituals and its own kinds of spaces. The conference, for example, is a space. Seminar,
Yeah.
or I know the webinar. And these spaces are great, but they're really great for us to have a conversation with ourselves.
Right.
They give us, they validate our own practices. They perhaps, perhaps you can learn more about your own work by seeing somebody else working in, I don't know, Brazil or someplace like that,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I think that what Bombay does is that Bombay pollutes that space too. It doesn't allow that space to stay pristine and
Huh.
removed from the. Especially for architecture, I think that becomes an important thing because as architects, we are always confronted with the fact that our work is about the tangible world outside the university.
Right.
It's with the lives of people and water systems and materials and labor and all of these.
Absolutely.
So it forces that relationship to happen, the relationship of thought to action.
Mm-hmm.
It refuses for that binary to be simplistic. It forces both action as well as thought to challenge the challenge itself with its opposite.
Right.
Where
Okay, yeah.
I think an architect like Korea kind of emerges from Bombay
Mm-hmm.
because in his work you constantly see that in the work that he does there is so much kind of critical thought,
Yeah.
and he's also involved with the making of ideas,
Yeah.
and I think that's really what I find interesting. And because Bombay has filmmakers and artists and all these kinds of people who may not, there are moments of friction between all of these,
Mm-hmm.
moments of conversation emerge between them, and that can be seen as, I guess, a very powerful possibility for the creations of ideas, I think.
And but these things are always these actors or these people are always sort of informally organized.
Yeah, well, largely the thing is this, right? I mean, it's a really big city, but it's a really small town. You have that, right?
Yeah.
And like, I don't know about any other city because I really only know Bombay
Uh-huh.
well enough to suffer. I'm better than most other cities. Is that the unfortunate thing, but also maybe the inevitable thing is that there are circles. There are
Right.
circles of the artistic and the cultural and the, I mean, circles exist, and in Bombay those circles are relatively more open. They are not as closed as they can be in other cities, which can sometimes being part of the circle is seen as a kind of position of power. But in Bombay, it's a little more open ended than that. So you meet at different sorts of places, art galleries. There are collectives that are created. I mean, we've been part of many collectives. There are multidisciplinary collectives.
Mm.
Like recently, we were part of something called 2020. A bunch of artists, filmmakers,
Huh.
poets,
Nice.
working on things together. So I mean, these organically emerge
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes stay around. The 2020 is still around, although we had the exhibition we did 2 years. We did sequential exhibitions like the Kalagoda Art Festival. One
Ah.
first at the Kalagoda Art Festival, and then there was another event, which was a sort of march. Um, but the group is still around, right?
Right.
So there's a group of people whom we know, and they all come from different creative fields, largely, I would say.
Okay. And in terms of the sort of thrust of these groups or these, I love saying the word actors, although they're not all conventional actors. In terms of the thrust of the thinking or the maybe paranoia or the kind of force behind these discussions, is there a real yearning for newness as a idea, as a concept, or as a thing? Are people constantly talking about trying to do something new, or they're talking about things that are a little more nuanced or detailed? Or is there a nuance for what is understood as new among these
Complicated,
circles?
complicated question. The reason why all of these different disciplines come together largely, okay, the first kind of big project that we had done together,
Mm-hmm.
that I was part of, so
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak to any other, but it was quite a large project. It was called Cinema City. I don't know whether Chirag has told you about it,
Yeah.
but it was. I don't think Chirag was around also at that time.
No, I did work on it. I did some transcribing. It was the first year. Yeah, but
Yeah,
anyways.
I don't know. So it was a project that was a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary
Mm-hmm.
kind of art, architecture, filmmaker, all these people together. There was an organization that was called Majlis,
Ah.
still there. And Majlis put together this project with Madhushri Datta, who's a filmmaker, who heads Majlis at the kind of was organizing it. And it was imagined as a sort of collective which would explore the relationship between cinema and the city of Bombay. That was open ended. And it was started in 2009, and we used to just meet at the Majlis offices and discuss what that can be. And we as architects used to present our imagination of how we can work that relationship out. Filmmakers did their own thing. It was like that, right? So it was a bunch of ideas that emerged. And then we as a school did the research work, looked at the places that we actually were thinking of looking at cinema as an industry. So we looked at the spaces of the assembly line and the people involved in the assembly line of the making of film. That was what we did. But we were also interested in the way that different neighborhoods within Bombay are represented differently in different films, like, Marine Drive or KRVIA and all of these places. So anyway, we did this sort of research, and then the entire project was imagined as a series of exhibitions. So even in the first year, we had an exhibition at the National Center for the Performing Arts in South Bombay. The next year, we came to Germany, and we did an exhibition at the Berlinale 2010, if I'm not wrong.
Nice.
And each of those exhibitions used to take the material that we had done as research and process it or reprocess it into something that can be shared or makes an argument. And that process involved us working with filmmakers and artists and all different kinds of people. So that's actually how the project itself evolved. The project constantly evolved through many, many dialogues with all these different artist groups, creative groups. And then finally, eventually, it led to some kind of book and publication in 2013-14. That's actually how the way the project works. So what happens is that there is I think because Bombay is a city that is about producing, film, art, etc. It seems that a lot of the people who really are participating in these conversations are interested in making things, film. And I think once you kind of start thinking about making, simplistic sort of positions become almost untenable to hold. You have to, in many ways, begin to engage with economies and publics and government organizations and these different bureaucracies and stuff like that.
The constant negotiation.
Sorry?
It's a constant negotiation. Everything.
And so what ends up happening is that the question of newness that you put forth is always there because of that. Because you're always in many ways constantly critiquing the presumptions that you've had as in the project that you did before. You're always in some senses trying to make newness or look at the direction that your work is going to go to now that is done. And sometimes that direction is shaped by the interaction that you're having with the filmmaker friend over the next week, or an art exhibition that you went to, or something that you read, perhaps.
Right.
So there is a definite kind of the advantage of these different sorts of actors in the same space really allow you to constantly question presumptions that you have for yourself. So I think that for me, that's been the best thing about being in the city, is to constantly watch yourself grow because of these shifts. I find there are many people sometimes who stick to an ideological position in the beginning, and all their work for the past 15 years is doing the same thing, and that's extremely boring.
Yeah. Unless maybe sometimes it's done with a great deal of difference and diversity within it. That's a.
But what I'm saying is that I feel that often then the work itself becomes merely a representation of the thought. It doesn't necessarily kind of engage with the. I understand what I'm trying to say.
I think
it's like it becomes polemical or what I mean.
You're right, rhetorical.
Work itself doesn't have its own value. It becomes text.
There's no in philosophy they would say there's no embodiment happening with the object of the work. Let's say within the object of the work where.
And I also think then there is no sort of translation of that thought in a way also, like that also ceases to happen. The thought becomes like this. It becomes kind of stationary, and then the work is just. It's like it's somewhere in the center, and then you're looking at it from different angles. Every piece of work that you do is a ये एंगल से देख लिया अब ये थॉट को, then we saw it from that angle and it just keeps
almost
I'm really thinking about, I'm really thinking, this is what I call the I will always love you problem, right? And this is my, Houston's I will always love you. And actually, I mean, this is relevant, I think, especially for this conversation because you guys are in Germany and I'm in Bombay.
okay.
Is that what I find is that there are certain ideas that sell well abroad.
Right.
Okay. There's a certain, I mean, especially in Germany, there's a sort of, and not just in Germany, in all of Europe, there's a sort of guilt of colonialism and imperialism that is very much. So a lot of brown people have figured that out. So what they do is that they then sell the exotic other
Right.
as this incredible thing that you just don't understand. Okay, and in Europe, people are more than happy to consume it because they're like, oh, at least we feel bad about it.
Right.
So what happens is that particular imagination of the exotic, strange, weird, I don't know what, and it doesn't necessarily mean you need snake charmers and elephants. It could just be the wonderful dynamics of the slums in Bombay, or my favorite, the dabbawalas.
Yeah.
oh my god.
Shantaram.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Shantaram, great one.
Yeah.
So you take that thing, right?
Right.
And in abroad, of course, they will lap it up because it's absolutely down their alley.
Right.
So what happens is that you get your own validation by the fact that you get called to Germany to make a presentation or whatever. That becomes the mode, right? And once you get that validation, it seems as if it is. You also believe that it is right. That you are right. And validation will keep coming because that's exactly what international kind of discourse would want from you as a brown person.
Right.
But you never, and you don't want to question it because you're getting your own validation through it. This is the Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You problem. Is that if you go for a Whitney Houston concert, if she doesn't sing I Will Always Love You, it's a problem. Right? So it's like that. When a foreign university calls a brown academic to make a presentation,
Right.
if that person doesn't bring the slum, then
Yeah, you're in
What are you
trouble.
doing
It's
there?
like
Yeah.
that's a very confusing.
Yeah. And I mean, I must say, I'm saying this because I know I've been guilty of it too. So I've been, just to make it clear, right?
Yeah.
Because it is something that you see yourself automatically doing, and it's really scary.
And it's a kind of low-hanging fruit you're trying to say.
It's really too easy. And what ends up happening because of that is that you are not necessarily growing. You are staying still. You have asked the question that they wanted you to ask. Okay, and you have forgotten that there are many more questions that perhaps that one needs to be able to look at. So the tricky thing is this though. The tricky thing is to be able to balance both because God, I'm telling too many stories.
We are
It's
here
okay,
for
right?
all of
we are-
them.
we are
Please,
here for
please
that.
keep going.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one more story. So once upon a time, the Netherlands Architecture Institute, which is these amazing men, Ole Baumann and Jon, very close friend, they wanted to do something in India. Okay, so Jon says, can KRVIA organize something? So I said, okay, we'll organize it. We organized it, but we decided to organize it at some place in Worli, for some reason. I don't know. Make it closer to people. We had to call all the architects of Bombay for that meeting.
Okay.
So we made calls. We made calls saying, come, whatever.
Yeah.
As soon as we said Dutch college, Dutch NAI, they are like, yeah, we'll come. Like, in the mess.
Everyone's
Right? And I get so pissed about that because we do seminars every year. Okay. We are begging people to come, and then not a single person turns up. Okay. You have like some Dutch people are coming, and now suddenly everybody's dying to be part of that room. Okay, I was pissed off. But what was really nice was that actually is that what happened is that so we had this meeting. The meeting happens. KRVIA shows some work that we had done in Pune or whatever, irrelevant. But after that entire discussion, Ole, and I love the Dutch, very simply says, okay, fine, this is all very good, etc. But tell us a very simple thing. what can you do for us and what can we do for you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Natural. Yeah, like that very much. And very Bombay, na? Like very सीधा बोलना. Don't give me all that.
धंधे का टाइम है.
I love that. So, I'm anyway really angry. Okay, really pissed. It's like, what we can give you Bombay. It's there, na? You can come.
और क्या चाहिए?
Okay, you tell me any other place that is going to be there like this is not going to happen. And what you can give us validation, for God's sake. We've been doing this every year. Nobody turns up. Okay, you called once and they all came. Finally, we have to recognize the fact that the spaces of validation, unfortunately, for many of us in India, continue to be dictated by those in Europe and America. As long as we are able to, I mean, we have to understand the way that power works, no?
Right.
So I think so one has to be able to kind of say that, okay, that is unfortunately the space. It's important to start trying to create an alternative space, an alternative mode through which one understands architecture and architectural value systems, aesthetic systems, perhaps in this country, in this particular place that we are at.
But you're not.
And
Sorry.
the only way to do it, and maybe the only way to do it is to do it as a ventriloquist through the face.
Okay, so in a way, you're suggesting that this one-directional binary that the East and the Western world has, or I would rather say South Asia and the Western world has at the moment, needs to be muddied, or do you want it to become one-directional in the opposite sense?
Of course not. That would be dumb. I mean, that's naive to even imagine that it's first of all possible, or even that it is good. That itself can be extremely reactionary in nature.
Right.
In India, but that's bullshit. I mean, if you think about it, this idea that of exceptionalism that exists in a particular place, that is, this is truly us, is another sort of myth that is, I think, sometimes even more dangerous than the imagination of modernity.
Because this is something that is also problematic in the disciplinary sense, let's say, because the 1972 Act states that only people that have a license from the Council of Architects in India can practice architecture in India. But that also kind of suggests that, say, for example, I think Stephen Hall will be building that museum with the Bhau Dajilad extension, or...
No,
okay,
it's
in terms of whether it's happening or not. But I'm saying, would it be fair for anyone in Mumbai to stand up and say, but how is it possible that Stephen Hall knows what should show up in Mumbai?
There have been people who've complained about that, actually. There are lots of people who get into this idea of the Indian architect knowing whatever. I don't think that is useful, actually, at all. I think that in both cases, I find them to be a problematic imagination. To say that merely because Stephen Hall is whatever, American, is he or British?
American.
American. Merely because Stephen Hall is American, he cannot build in India or should not build in India is I think protectionist nonsense. But also to imagine that he would not know how to build in India is a little naive. But on the other hand, if I look at the design of the museum itself that he did do, it does look like a kind of signature style thingy that he's doing absolutely anywhere on earth.
Yeah.
I mean, for God's sake, I mean, Zarato, I've seen the buildings that Zaha Hadid does around the world and they all look exactly the same. There is no difference. So then what you are is a mere commodity. Now all you are is a style, a stamp. So I don't know whether I'm saying we, I don't mean me, I mean the project should be judged on the basis of merely the brand, which should be based on the base. So what is right, simply put, wherever that what is right comes from. There's no point in kind of thinking in terms of identity over there. We all live in multiple identities. There's no point in saying that we are one and not the other.
How would you go about then? Of course, it's not something one person takes up as a project and does, but how would you begin to work on how to shift the focus towards a more nuanced discussion of this, let's say, pseudo subaltern activism that goes on sometimes in what you call protectionist nonsense in a way. How would
Yeah.
you go on to bring in more
Well, it's
nuance to
important.
that?
I think for me, I mean, it's been. I mean, for me, it's important for us to be able to read. That's why I think it's really important to be an academic. For me,
Okay.
it is the space which can really allow you to create new spaces of validation, as well as new frameworks through which one can examine what role architecture should be playing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think that is really, we have to start writing new histories, for example. I mean, the history books that we have are just dismal, most of them. Indian history books are ridiculous. Uh, Except for maybe a handful that may be kind of trying to look at Indian modernity in a more complex way. Most of them are a list of styles and then a bunch of star architects. Actually, that's what we have.
Right.
And it really doesn't even begin to look at what the complexity of historical narratives in the country actually are. So I think the academic space can become a space where one can rewrite those histories.
Mm-hmm.
You know, also rethink questions like of sustainability and all these stupid sorts of words that we very often take for granted, which are not, unfortunately, bad terms. It's what has happened is that they have only ended up becoming sorts of these glib terms that we use, which mean nothing. Efficient and environmental friendly and all of that stuff. We don't really even ask the question as to what does this really mean on the ground. I think that a great attention on the concrete realities of our particular context is an important thing to do. That is one thing. And the second thing I would say, and this is for me an important learning from actually a project that Vineet worked on with us,
Okay.
uh, which was looking at the spaces of Ambedkar in Bombay,
Mm-hmm.
is to really start thinking about what are the core value systems through which we understand what does it mean, what does goodness mean, what does betterness mean. And I don't think it's as subjective that is okay. Everyone has their own. I think there are
It's a
certain
shared
values.
idea.
Yeah, I think there are certain things that we share as modern individuals who are living in this particular time. I think there are certain things that we share, and I think those can be very clearly encapsulated in the kind of very, very, very sorry, I can't say simple, but in the very clarified ideas of from the French Revolution, which is liberty, equality, and justice, and fraternity. If one says that, if one is able to calibrate what good architecture is based on those terms, is it just, environmentally, socially just, let's say, uh, that all those resources perhaps are being spent on something, uh, or equal or free or whatever. But for me, what's most interesting is the word fraternity in that entire group. Fraternity is what? Family, love, brotherhood.
Absolutely.
So
All
it
of that.
seems as if it places love,
Mm-hmm.
the most sort of instinctive and maybe even irrational imagination, as part of those four things. Huh? And I think that is nice when you think about it. Is your architecture a gift to someone you love, or is it something that you are sharing?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, how does one begin to even think about that? Is it about even loving the site? If you know what I mean. Is it
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
the what has happened? Like, "Arey yaar, I don't like my dog. He bit my whatever." Right? You do all of these things. Right? We
Uh-huh.
still love the dog.
Mm-hmm.
So, in spite of all the faults, there's a certain presence to that particular place.
Yeah.
Uh, is there a level of love that you have when you are talking about it? No?
Mm-hmm.
How do you recalibrate all the value systems that we have assumed that architects have through love, maybe? That might be a.
And love of I mean, I think what you're also sort of sketching out here is an idea of what we could begin to think of as an author again,
Yeah.
to originate how an author has been, because there is this mini sort of discourse on authorship within the larger aesthetic disciplines, right? Every aesthetically engaged discipline has somehow tried to find a means of sort of delivering value to every author, whether it be literature where value is brought through not simply royalty paid to the author. The works are discussed through all kinds of historical and theoretical references. But this is something that is a little bit more muddy and problematic in India and in Mumbai. And there is the risk that...
You're talking about the idea of the author architect as this individual
Yes.
producing things.
Something...
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing that you are bringing up, because I keep thinking about the ways in which our cities are actually being built today. And I'm thinking about the fact that most of the great cities that we admire across history were never built by singular, incredible
Absolutely.
imagination. Manic, line para, kya genius line. They were never really born out of those. They came out of collective histories and memories and typologies that have existed for many years.
Yeah.
So there was a sort of wisdom that was part of the generation of those incredible buildings.
Right.
That transcended time. What happened, of course, with the modern era and with the fact that with capitalism you have the division of labor and the specified role that the architect is supposed to play within the mode of production.
Right.
You begin to separate the individual from the collective. You also begin to separate the act of design from the act of building. And that those sorts of schisms, once they are created, start creating things like copyright. And so with the imagination of copyright comes the idea of me and mine and my particular signature that I would like to kind of lay upon the land. And if we have to really think about making an architectural imagination that is relevant to us here today, that actually belongs to so many, it's such a sort of complex world and economies that we are living in, not just one, but so many. And if we have to now start thinking about the way that architecture can play a role in making lives better, let's presume that that's what architects have to do. It really needs to challenge some of those presumptions. And it's actually not easy to do. I mean, I must say I'm guilty of doing some horrible things as a teacher. When I was faced with those possibilities. I'll tell you a story, Chalo. We were doing a project in Malmani, which is in Bombay. It's a slum area. And the project was a nice project. The students had to go into the city, into Malmani. They just had to sit there for, I think, 10 days, keep making sketches of different places. That was all. And as they were making sketches, they get to know people. And they get to know, they just automatically happen. They're sitting there and they're drawing. So they get to know people.
Right.
So it brings their own idea of who they are. And they also get to meet people who are very unlike them. It's predominantly Muslim and Dalit sort of area. Which we felt was important for these middle class students to do, just break your sense of self. That's all. And then after that, we asked them to develop a project there.
Okay.
A simple project, not complicated as a process goes. I had this one boy who was not from Bombay. He came from a very, very small town. Tribal boy, actually, I learned later. And he wanted to build a bathhouse, something like that. And he brought the design to the table, okay? Second year, this is in the first semester, third semester. And that design was it was a nice building if it's a small town. Like it had domes and minarets and, arches and everything that any good modernist like me would balk at. Okay. And I was like, oh God, this guy, I don't know what to do. Plan was working. There's nothing, what is there in a plan? Right? Yeah. So you had like extremely strange building. Okay. And everyone else is doing this high, like, Corbusian stuff and like stuff like that. And he's like, this is what I think is good. And I was screwed in the head. I didn't know what to do. I had two options over there. One thing was that besides my own sort of, but at that point already I knew that holy shit, this guy is actually challenging my own presumptions of what I think is good.
Was was he super confident about it? Like he was
No,
like,
he was very hesitant. He was very hesitant. He was
Okay.
very hesitant. He was very shy. He
okay,
really felt that that is what is great, right? That's the
right.
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah.
And it is. It's not bad.
Yeah.
If you think about it, big deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a way in which a lot of people love that kind of architecture. Simply put, I was balking at it because I've been trained in a completely different way.
Right.
Yeah.
And I also was balking because I know that if he goes for an external jury,
He might meet more people that are trained like you,
who might not be so
sympathetic.
self-critical, maybe I was feeling self-critical, like who might be like, oh, this is just not done, this is horrible, this is ugly, which is possible,
Right.
So like now, what do I do? Am I indoctrinating him,
Yeah.
okay, this boy,
Wow.
in
Yeah.
a particular imagination of goodness, okay, that is mine, but it's mine because I've been trained in a certain way, because
Right.
it's become right. So he's been trained differently. Now, what? And there is no reason why his building will not be good. It will be great.
Yeah.
What was it about modern architecture that I felt was better than that? I didn't have an answer to that question. I don't think anyone has an answer to that question.
Yeah, not a really good one at least.
Yeah.
No, there is no answer to that question. It's only a simplistic, simple sort of fashion style that we all seem to think the modern is some sort of style that we think represents uh, the aspirations of who we are to become.
Or it actually
Like,
activates the possibility of an aspiration itself.
yeah, that's the presumption. No,
That's the big.
that's what Nehru wanted to do.
I want to step in for a second and just point out, like, I remember when I was studying there. I mean, I actually want to ask you, how many times do you think there were instances where such a situation happened? And how did you have to deal with that? Like, just as a teacher, what were the various stances that you had to take, or the positions that you took in the past? Because I remember there were instances where I would, if I was part of a sort of design crit, I would see you know kind of immediately what a project was about, a category into which it could fall. It was this kind of, yeah, I can see where it is going and what it's kind of going towards. When you were faced with a point where this category suddenly got disturbed, how was the confrontation, and does it happen ever so often also?
It happens more and more now, I
Okay.
think. It happens more and more now. We are getting a wider variety of the kinds of students that we're getting within the school. And I think that's actually the places that I grow the most, that you grow the most, because it actually comes up with, you're like, okay, fine. Something else. And it happens with some students. I think usually there are students who bring something new to the table that challenges your presumptions of things. And often it doesn't come from the people who are screaming in your face. People who are screaming in your face, who come with this sort of really woke collectives, like, they usually are telling things that you already know. They are not disturbing you.
Right.
Okay.
They're coming, they're saying the same things that you've heard before, that you actually you already know the problems with that already. There's nothing else. It's not disturbing you.
Yeah, it's like reinforcement.
Yeah.
Yeah, just reinforce, which is okay, it's important, it's all right. The ones that are able to go in these new strange directions are the ones that disturb you, which I like actually. I mean, that's really where a lot of interesting things can emerge from. And it's also more difficult because you have to make a decision at that point. Like there's this boy who comes from a tribal area in Maharashtra.
Yeah.
Okay, when he finishes his architecture, what is he going to do? If he's going back to, let's say, wherever he's coming from, fine. Then do I instill in him a certain kind of becoming that allows him to participate proactively in that milieu?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he is coming to Bombay to get an education because he doesn't want to go back. He wants to find a way to participate within this world, the world of Arch daily magazines and
Publications and Instagram
yeah,
too.
Yeah.
all of that stuff. Right? That's the world that he wants to part of it. I guess so. So at which point you're in a quandary, no?
Yeah. Yeah.
How sorry.
No,
do you-
go ahead.
then I also often wonder, because it's something obviously all of us have gone through, and for me and I think also Chirag, it's quite fresh, and we often still talk about all the teachers we've encountered during our studies, and yes, much less there's very little antagonism now, and we look at all our teachers quite nicely.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we were in
Yeah.
school, the discussions were a little bit more charged, I guess, from back then. At least from what I remember, charged also nice ways. But how do you think an architect? What's your sense of an architecture student of today, and more importantly, what do you know of how you are received by a student? What's that encounter like when a student comes into the world of architecture, first year, first semester, and they encounter a character like yourself?
I wouldn't know, but I know. I mean, I wouldn't know really. There was a time once when I was younger, when the age gap between my students and me wasn't that much. When
Right.
it was much more casual and much more friendly. They were friends. They continue to be friends even today. We were learning together. Like I said, I didn't know nothing when I came and joined KRVIA. I learned as I was teaching. So in many ways, I guess we were learning together. So in that sense, that was one word. As the age gap has increased, I'm almost now as old as their fathers are.
Okay.
Actually,
Yeah.
the relationship has changed substantially. Um, I find that, but I do recognize that there is a certain way in which a teacher is always a performer or a figure.
Right.
There's a figure. There's a figure to the teacher.
Yeah.
So he's not a person only, actually.
Yeah.
Teacher is not a person, the teacher is a figure.
Right.
And the part of teaching is performing that figureness, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Professing.
That act of performance that plays very much part of it. So I think it's important to structure or to be wary of the way one constructs that persona, the persona of the figure of the teacher. I think it's important to this is where I try and think about the way that it's important that to structure that imagination. I think it's important to instill a certain level of comfort. That's one thing that I feel, because I don't think fear helps.
Right.
Although I know a lot of my students are very very scared of me.
Hello.
But the,
No,
but the
I'm just kidding.
vulnerability,
Yeah.
let's say, I think that's a much better word than fear. Of course, it does show as fear sometimes.
But it's also important to show yourself as vulnerable. Yourself as vulnerable.
As a teacher.
As a teacher, yeah. One should never. I don't believe that it's useful to present oneself as infallible. It's always important to present oneself as also growing, thinking through things.
Yeah.
It's more honest, I believe, and it also allows the student to also take a little bit more responsibility. It doesn't become like teacher ne bola. So to social, I may be wrong. It could be. That is important. The other thing that I also believe, I think it's also important for the teacher to present a open persona. What I mean is a liberal, open-ended, easy persona. I believe that it's important to do so because I think that students, because I believe that is a better way for a person to be in the world, actually. To be open to different kinds of identities and not too ideologically strict.
Right.
And I think if a teacher presents herself or himself as that, then I think most students also feel that they can also be that way. And I know, for example, that I feel like the performance of a teacher is not only what one is saying or doing in a classroom, but it's also the persona one constructs.
There are darknesses across where we hide, places that can't be seen. We play games of hide and find, discover each other in the night, in the forest, under the staircase, on the terrace, in the shade, in the shadow. Masks help us become the husband, the wife, the doctor, the patient, the chore, the police, in a rehearsal of who we would later become.
There we were, trying to be men. Our frontier to the south was the railway station that we sometimes walked barefoot to, where we had Chinese food on the streets. For New Year's, we used to take the train to the glitter of South Bombay, watch an English film, and then walk to the Gateway of India for the fireworks.